Looking for a great new music podcast? Check out the Out Loud Queer Music Podcast with host Kenny Fitzpatrick, brought to you by the Qreview.
We've got music and interviews with LGBTQ artists from around the globe. Find us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of QTube. And today I am joined by singer-songwriter artist Brandon Anderson, and we're going to get into some interesting chat today. But right off the bat, first of all, thanks for being here today, Brandon. And I hope that you're enjoying your summer months so far. How have things been for you? Because it's been a weird year, and we're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel. But how have things been for you?
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and chat with you. It's been a year. When the pandemic began, I had just released my last album. Actually, was released like 2 years ago now, but it was like right after that, my father passed away. And then right when I was getting things back on track for that album, the pandemic happened and everything shut down. So it's been definitely a year, and but it was definitely a time of growth and learning and kind of repackaging and reprocessing like what I wanted to create and where I was in my life. So there's been a lot of actual, I think, positive growth that has happened in this last year as well, as kind of a lot of uncertainty that I think we've all been experiencing over the last year.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear about that. I mean, it's, I've known a few folks who either, prior to going into pandemic or even actually during the pandemic have lost loved ones. And it's such a time of just change and just strangeness that when things like that happen, there's never a perfect time, but it doesn't feel like it was a great time. But what's come out of it, I guess, for you too, is new music that we have from you. Pixelated Love is the new song, and it's out right now. And you're an artist that I've been following for a while, and and I come from the background of education and working with students and through student government. And a lot of your music has resonated with me because there's so much messaging that's in there that I've heard from students and from, the education side of life. But Pixelated Love, while still having great messaging and strong messaging, there's a lightness to it. That not that your music was really heavy. It's just that it did have some, there's a lot of darkness in the world that you talked about. But this seems to be like you're stepping into new shoes or onto new ground. Is that fair to say?
I think that's very fair to say. And also interesting that you say that, because I work in education as well. I teach a lot in public schools, songwriting and things like that. So I also have a big education piece of my life as well, and working with students. So it's interesting that you hear that in my music. But definitely my last album, specifically Wages of Sin, was very dark. It was my reaction to the Trump era, and was really processing a lot of my frustrations with the world and the darkness that I saw around me, which all kind of then culminated in COVID and what we've experienced. And I went through that process, unpacking a lot of that darkness, which for me was cathartic to be able to get it out. But I did kind of end, as I said, I never got to actually play that album out live. I never got to really experience that, put that into the world in a physical space. I have music videos for all those songs, but it was a very digital experience, which was really kind of mirrored the experience we were all having in our little digital spaces for the last year. And in that time, I kind of really started having really great connections with people online and reconnecting with people I hadn't talked to in many years, or reconnecting with new people online as we're all trying to like make some kind of human connection while we were locked in our here in New York, where I was locked in my apartment for months. And so then my partner and I actually made the choice that we were going to be crazy and drive across country for the winter to escape the second lockdown. So we actually drove to LA, which was terrifying in a pandemic. And we just like stopped basically for gas and like, like had buckets of hand sanitizer, and we're just like, just trying to avoid people the whole way. But we got there and we had like a beautiful Airbnb that had like an outdoor space, which was just so healing after being locked into space and what we went through here in New York specifically. And in that time, I really started to just kind of like refine joy in small things, like just sitting out in the garden and like watching hummingbirds fly by, and like, and got to really kind of let the darkness kind of go a little bit, and realize that what I was really craving was the things that I missed were like joy and dancing with friends and going out. And so that made me kind of hungry to create some music that was just going to celebrate that joy and manifesting kind of the world that I want to see, instead of just commenting on the world as it is. And so I think that there was a shift where all of a sudden, instead of just commenting on what is, I wanted to kind of start writing some music about what if.
I think that's awesome. I think it's hard for us to do sometimes, to make that mental shift, because the heaviness that's around us and the things that are directly in front of us a lot of the times are the things that kind of imprint on us and overtake. So it is difficult, it's challenging, but when you can do it and you can find a way through it and make that mental shift, I think it's releasing, and it's like a freedom for yourself to, not only reinvigorate yourself, but also rediscover yourself a little bit. Reflection of the things we love, we sometimes take for granted, I think, because the elements directly in front of us tend to be just so much louder. But that's completely what I get from Pixelated Love when I listened to it. And when I first heard it, I was kind of like, okay, this is different. This is different for Brandon. I was just like, this is good. I, again, think that your music has been so thoughtful and thought-provoking that, and again, being in education and taking that into consideration, you don't want to be pigeonholed. You don't want to be stereotyped as a specific kind of artist, because there's so many more elements and layers to you, that when I heard this, it was a shift I've needed to hear, I guess, in an artist, if that makes sense, to know that even vicariously through you, that there was light that people were experiencing when they have felt such darkness. If that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And it was a awakening for me as I finished that song. Kind of, I played it for a few people, and they were like, "What's happening?" But I think that it was a realization for me too, of just that when everything shut down, I had been on a trajectory, that started when I moved to New York at 24, and I had been building a career, building my life here. And there was never a break to stop and be like, what am I doing? Let's reassess. It's always like the next opportunity presents itself, you take it, right? You can't just sit and wait for somebody to come. So I had never had an opportunity to like not work for a little while, or not, and just kind of sit and think about what do I want to create? And so I think that a lot of what happened for me is that this break let me see that I had been kind of, it's funny. It's like, I feel like I'm coming out again a second time because I had been kind of holding certain things back, especially in my music, not consciously, but it just had happened over time because I had built kind of a niche and I was sticking in it, and realized that there was more to me that I was not expressing that I wanted to. And so that was a big realization of like allowing some different colors that I think before I would have not shown. And and there's many reasons I think why that is. Yeah, so I'm excited to kind of this new album I'm working on is all about kind of this rebirth of kind of rediscovering parts of myself that over many years, just because of the society we live in and the industry we work in, that have been suppressed, and whether I knew it or not.
I think that's fair, and I think that what's great about it is seeing that you know, the light at the end of the tunnel, and that rediscovery through the music. You're also, and I mean, I there's different parts to this. You have kind of launched a campaign online called, you know, for Pride, and saying this Pride, you're stepping out of the frame. And you've been talking a lot about, you know, your own self-expression and, you know, self-comfort, I guess, with certain things. And I think that the idea of it, and I love how you've kind of done the artwork with it too, with yourself. But I think the idea of it is kind of brilliant, of, you know, realizing that sometimes we allow ourselves to be boxed in by certain, you know, expectations or ideals, and you're kind of breaking that and stepping out of it to the pieces that you want to embrace, that you're comfortable with or want to be more comfortable with. Where did the whole kind of idea for this kind of come about?
Well, I think Pixelated Love was definitely the spark. Once I wrote that and was starting to, you know, get it ready to be released, I was like, well, what does this mean? Why, what am I changing my whole sound now? Like, are people going to accept this? And I think I started then reflecting on, why am I concerned about it, right? If I wrote it, it's something that I've put out, you know, it's part of me, and it's there. So I was just kind of thinking back to like kind of across my whole, how it started and how I ended up where I was, and just thinking about, you know, the little things that you, like when I first moved to New York at 24, I, you know, just came out as I moved to New York, basically. But I was having a big conflict because at the time there were no out gay musicians that were big. I mean, you know, like right. Elton John came out, but he was already a superstar, right? There was no one young coming up that was like someone to look to that was making
relatable.
Yeah, and so I made a kind of a conscious choice. And also, like in New York, you know, there was the clubs that you had to play in if you wanted to start building a following, and they were a very straight male white club, and you know, they were fine with you being gay as long as it was not the central piece, right? You had to in some ways be more political, more in depth, more deep for them to be like, oh, that you're actually an artist of merit versus someone, because it felt like you either could kind of compress parts of yourself and, you know, make your music really kind of about something so that they found it interesting, or you could go play the Pride circuit, but though you could not do both. Right. Those paths did not cross. And so I think because of that, for many years, I was kind of, you know, trying to be the deeper, to really get into issues and really, you know, kind of focus my work outward instead of inward. You know, there was definitely personal moments. It's all from my lens. Still, I don't think I was being untruthful, but I do think that there were parts of myself that I did not let shine for many years because I wanted to be able to play those clubs, and I wanted to be able to, you know, be taken seriously as an artist. And I think after time that, you know, it just wears on you, that like, even it eventually does feel like lying, even though you're just concealing. You're not even concealing. You're just not emphasizing parts of yourself that you normally would in the rest of your life.
I hear the expression imposter syndrome a bit that gets thrown around when, you know, you're trying to fit yourself into somebody else's mold, because that there's a lock on the door, and the only way to get the door open is to fit the keyhole. And you know, that people aren't being or they're not being as genuine with themselves. They're not giving themselves the room to be who they really are. because of things like that. So I hear that quite a bit from different artists, to be honest.
Yeah.
As well as that fear of, you know, not being able to play because, you know, they want a certain image that they're comfortable with. So it's more adapting yourself for someone else's comfort, or vision of what is appropriate or okay, versus just allowing you to be an artist, which is really, it's quite a stranglehold.
I remember something that always has stuck with me, that, you know, because in my real life with my friends, I'm very like outgoing and fun and goofy, and like, you know, I can be very campy as well. And like, and so I had a friend who was just like, who is a fellow writer who I was working with, and he was like, why is all of your stuff so serious? You're like such a funny, fun person. Why, you know? And I at the time I was like, because I'm making art, you know, like, you know. But the question actually was really him noticing that my full personality was not in my work, that I am political and serious and thoughtful. Like, I am all of these things, but I also am other things. And those things were not being reflected in my work. And I think back to that question, because that question happened 10, 15 years ago now, but it's still, it kind of was a piece to unlocking, as I'm thinking now, you know, how does this happen, that someone who's been out since they were 24 and has never hid that, but is still in some ways in the closet professionally.
Yeah. And I think that it's such a catch-22. You know, I remember, I think it was Troye Sivan who maybe said it, but I think other artists have echoed it, where, and I hear this more with men than I do with women within the community, that, you know, there's a level of gay or a level of performance that is okay. Mm-hmm. And then if you're too gay or you're too camp or you're, you know, too much, well, that's not okay, because that's discomfort. And even though, you know, if you think about Elton, and you think about Elton back in the days when he kind of first started, and he was always a showman, but that was seen as showmanship until he came out, and then it became camp. There's a real slippery slope there, where you want to be yourself, you want to represent yourself, and in times there is going to be moments, regardless of your sexuality, of, you know, campiness or flightiness or, you know, just ridiculousness. Everybody has that, and as an artist, most artists have the freedom and the room to be able to have that. But when it comes down to, I guess, a queer artist, especially within the men, you know, our cisgender male artists, it's kind of like there's a line, and if you go too far into that quote unquote camp, then that's not something that we think is viable. It's not something that we think is valuable or lucrative or presentable. And it's like you're made to feel shame for something.
It also feels sometimes dangerous to be. Because, and that's, you know, toxic masculinity is real. Got a song about it. But like,
absolutely.
I think back to, I was the kid, my family took family vacations every summer. We'd go on road trips for 2 weeks and we'd camp across the country. And I went with my 3 other siblings, and I was always like, as a kid, I was always like making a scene, like with my sisters, and like creating dance routines, and we'd do it in front of like people, you know, like jump in front of cars and be so like, always like over the top, right? My whole life. And then as I started aging, I started seeing cues, you know, from others that like, as a kid, it's acceptable. And it's like, oh, he's a wild kid. Once I started getting to a certain age, it started being like, I would start getting, the looks I got were very different. And I think that started kind of, and then slowly that trains you like, oh, I can't do that. And I kind of watched myself diminish over time, you know, like I wouldn't do those things. I became more serious. I became more closed off, because I was like, this is now dangerous for me to do. I will be labeled. I will be I could be hurt, I could be attacked, you know, like, and I remember, you know, like Matthew Shepard happened when I was in middle school, and I remember that very well. And the thing I remember most about it is like teachers at my school being like, who were like arts teachers even, being like, well, he did have it coming, he hit on those, you know, like things like that. And just like hearing that language, you're just like, okay, you know, like danger, I have to be a certain way in public. And then that even getting reinforced by like even friends of mine who, you know, are very supportive of me, but like would not go to a gay bar, but expect me to come to all their straight bars and do not see the problem with that, you know. And there's just, because it's just this world we live in that is decided that this is the norm, and that, you know, so I was just kind of defining what can my role be in this world, and what is allowed and what is acceptable. And so I think it's just been a lot of kind of breaking against that now, and feeling like I feel like I still have held on to some of those codings that I gotten, even though
I think it's hard to let go of them, though, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think that's a whole process in itself, especially if you live which we do. We live in a world of microaggressions that constantly tell you, and I've had to explain this to students and to friends that, you know, at no point in time in our life have we been watching a movie, a TV show, and even the idea of sex between a man and a woman, unless you're of a certain age, which is quite young, we don't ever kind of go like, oh God, gross. However, when it's made in jest between two men, we will hear that, which is just a public output that, you know, you are gross. And there's those microaggressions and those kinds of things that happen that people don't take into consideration. And it's the same thing that some artists have said when they've had to tour and they've had to change their pronouns within their music, or they felt like they
or left them out. I definitely am guilty of, in my early albums, having just left out pronouns altogether. Which I look back and I'm like, why did I do that? But it felt necessary at the time, you know.
Safety. You know, the fear of what will the retaliation be. Forget about the fact whether or not anybody will play your music. It's those who do hear your music, what will their direct response be? Because if somebody hears it on the radio and disagrees with it, well, you know, or doesn't like it, that's fine. But if somebody's standing 5 feet in front of you when you're playing and they hear it, that's a completely different level of safety that's being compromised.
Yep.
Which I think is, you know, some of the reason why I resonate with your music is those messages kind of coming through at times, and how much, you know, youth are very smart, and they pick up on where a lot of us as adults, we gloss over things, or we know how to deflect very well to not allow ourselves like things to get into our heads, because like, I don't got time for this right now, I can't get into the heavy stuff. But youth are very smart and they pick up on all of that. So have you had great experience or good experience with younger, you know, queer individuals who have kind of picked up on that with your music and mentioned it to you?
Yeah, I mean, I work with kids from like second grade through grad school. So I have kind of a wide range. And, you know, those that have heard my music, I think that they understand where I'm coming from in a way that I think even people in my generation don't, unless they're queer as well. I think because now I feel like it's so much, I mean, they give me so much hope working with young people also, because they're just so much more awake to the world than my generation was at their age. Like I did a songwriting in schools program for Lincoln Center, and there was these high school kids that were writing about, and they had to write protest songs about like all of the issues happening. And like, they were so deep and they like had so much thoughtful. And I'm just like, I did not know anything that was going on when I was in high school. And so that's really helpful. And I think that and there's just also an openness. And now there are examples. Like that's I think the big difference. And as part of the campaign that I'm doing is like talking about representation and why it's so important. Because, you know, you hear these pushback of like, the football player just came out, like, why do we care? You don't see straight people coming up, but it's like, it so matters, because if I had seen a gay football player professional when I was a teenager, I would feel much more, like, oh, maybe I could play sports. Like, I stopped playing sports after, elementary school, because I was like, this is not a safe space for me. Like, I just knew it intrinsically. Right. And, in the same way that, like, now there are gay artists who are, very open and just living, Vincent's new album, which is just my favorite right now. I'm obsessed with it. Like, if that had existed when I was a teenager, even if I was getting bullied, even if all the other things were happening, I would see that and be like, that is possible. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that the doors are just so open now that I think it's just beautiful. And I just want that to continue. And I think that that representation will continue to matter, as long as you have people, coming at you with, I don't need to hear about your sex life, when it's like, well, they don't realize that everything that they do in their daily life tells me about their sex life, and that they're doing it constantly. They just don't realize they're doing it because it's accepted as the norm. And so I don't know, it's just a very different time, and watching the youth grow up with these representation, you can see the difference. I can see the confidence level that they have that I would never have been able to have, because they see these people who are out and, killing it.
Completely. It's one of the things that I love about finding new artists and being able to share their music, is the fact that, little Cindy or whoever sitting in a rural area who's never been told or never been shown or has never felt this, themselves in, this medium, to be able to see success and representation, and it can be life-changing and life-affirming to somebody who's never experienced it before.
Yep.
It's something else that you've talked about a bit too during this campaign is I guess body image, and being comfortable with yourself as part of it. And I mean, there's so many different pieces of, whether it's just representation on a sexuality standpoint, but just people in general being comfortable with who they are. That's a scope that's so big that I'm just curious, like, for you, was that an issue as just a man, or was it something that came along because of sexuality, just kind of being cognizant of body image?
Oh, that is something I'm still unpacking as we speak. But I definitely, I've had body image issues my whole life. I don't know that, it's like, is it the chicken or the egg? I think that there is, for men in general, especially gay men, there's being like the skinny, wafy gay man is the least acceptable kind of gay man to the straight world. If you're one of the butch muscle gays, you can, they'll accept you, and you can drink a beer, like that's acceptable, whereas, the femme queens out there, it's taken a lot longer to see a femme queen make it in a big, which is finally happening and is amazing. But I definitely, was not happy. And I think part of it was that I think a lot of it actually is that what I'm unpacking now, and I think I'm trying to unpack actually even in what I'm posting online now, is kind of a reflection for me to test out, what do I feel comfortable with? But I think a lot of it came from the fact of feeling that the sex part of my life was off limits for, like, I would be accepted as a gay person, even by people who love me. But if I talked about my sex life or anything about the gay experience, it was like, what, you could just see the walls go up and they're like, I don't want to talk about this. Whereas like, they'll just talk about their date and, like the girl they slept with the night before, like it's nothing. But for me, and I think that constant, hitting that wall or seeing that glaze happen, and even people I love and who love me, I think reinforced it started kind of putting this layers of shame on, like, I cannot be sexual. I can't show my body. I can't, anytime I like cross into like a sexual space, people feel uncomfortable.
Right.
so I think that because of that, I started, I think, in some ways feeling worse about myself because it was something I wasn't showing. And so I was like, well, I'm not going to work on it because that can't be a part of my life anyways, publicly, or if I'm not in a gay space. And I think that part of this campaign too, for me, is just kind of putting out there that, in some ways, to people who have, are my family and friends from years ago, putting up on thing, here's me shirtless, deal with it. Like, I am a sexual being, the same as you. And that I am not going to be ashamed about that. And I'm not going to be ashamed to do the same things that straight people have been doing for their whole lives without even thinking about it.
Correct.
And I think that that's been is the journey that I'm personally on right now, is just kind of re-embracing the fun, campy, sexy part of me that is always been a part of me, but it's not been something that I've shared in a public forum like social media or in a live performance, because I think I had been reinforced for many years that like that was not acceptable, that would not be accepted, and I don't care anymore. So is the big part of it. Yeah,
I think that's great. I think that part of our growth as humans, as people, is not only becoming comfortable, but also understanding why there was a discomfort and removing those barriers to kind of find our own way through it. It's a process, and as I've said to others, it's kind of like the coming out process is only one part of the whole, the whole journey, the whole, chess game, as it is,
yeah,
of life in a way, because there's so much more that goes along with it. I mean, we get to enjoy you and your experience through music, and I think it's very helpful, and I think it's very cathartic for us to have artists like you. That is, we're learning as we go through you, as you learn and as you develop, your own comfort levels. There's so much to kind of pick up on that. So I think of the youth that would come across your music, and even myself as somebody who's older than dirt sometimes, I feel that I still have so much that I learn through artists like yourself. So thank you for that, for having the fortitude and the ability to create the music like this, but also to have the chutzpah and to show people that you don't give AF anymore. It's like you want to embrace yourself and embrace everything about you, because I think the rest of us we grow with you.
Well, I appreciate that, and I hope that's true, because I definitely feel the same. Like, I grow through the artists that I watch and through my peers, and the people that I'm watching be braver than I was, and they're pushing, they're kind of pulling me up as I'm then hopefully pulling somebody else up who's then I'm gonna use them again because they're gonna get ahead of me, right? And we all just are kind of figuring it out, because I think as we're seeing more and more in this world is now, at least talking about things that they were not talking about before. But I think marginalized people of all kind feel this battle of like living in this box that has been created that we have, no say in. And then how do we navigate that and be authentic in a space that doesn't exist until we make it, And so I just hope to be a part of the creation of space where people feel that they can just be themselves.
I think you're doing it. I think you're creating it from everything that I've seen.
Oh, well, thank you.
Going back to music a bit for a sec. Pixelated Love is out, but what's the rest of your summer and the rest of the year look like for you? Should we prepare for the arrival of more music? Are you
probably should prepare?
No, they should prepare. All right.
Yeah, I have a new single coming out probably by the end of July, maybe the beginning of August, the latest. And that's going to be a part of a new album that's coming out hopefully by the end of summer. But this is all a new album that was kind of inspired by Pixelated Love and Born Of, and it all came very fast. And really just has been an exploration of all these things we've been talking about, really, and kind of exploring this rebirth of discovery that I'm having within myself, and kind of looking at doing what we're talking about is creating the kind of the what if, the space for creating a narrative that does not exist but should, and that kind of a place of joy and hope is hopefully what I'm putting out, which I think is going to be a nice contrast to my last album, which was definitely not coming from a place of hope.
It's all growth. It's all growth, my friend.
Yeah.
You got to get through. In order to get to the gravy, you got to get through the meat, right? I mean, it's I don't know. Maybe the gravy goes on top of the meat, but bad analogy. But in order to get to the good stuff, you got to kind of go through some of that darkness, because it's what gets you to the good.
Yeah, and I think it's also like for me as an artist too, I think I always have to identify the problems and then say like, here is the issue, and then here is a solution. I think that might be the educator in me as well. But so I think that in my last album, I was really exploring the problems as I saw them. And this is kind of exploring what could be if we elevate and kind of give ourselves the space to grow and think of a different path than we're on.
Listen, I love it. I'm here for it, and I can't wait to hear all the rest of it and the album. And I just think it's an exciting time. I think that, everybody has those moments where, not that you haven't arrived, but I think that, there's that feeling that you yourself are now stepping into some new shoes, some new sand between your toes that feels good. And because of that, we end up feeling good with it too. So I think we were there for you through the dark times, and we're going to definitely be there with you through these good times, and these energetic times.
Good. I'm looking forward to dancing with everyone. That's what I want to do.
We'll have to have a big dance party.
I will.
Virtually, of course.
I'm hoping to actually perform this live at some point. So that's my hope.
Awesome. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a great discussion, and thank you so much for being open about things and sharing so much of who you are and where you're headed and where you're coming from.
Well, and thanks for having me, and thanks for all that you do to, get some LGBTQ artists out there and support us, because, it's definitely an essential piece of the puzzle.
It's a lot of work. We got a lot of work to do. We're going to keep doing it. All right. Thanks, Brandon.
All right. Thank you so much.